It was discovered at that time Terry Bollea, also known as Hulk Hogan, was experiencing a serious medical-related issue.
When a 71-year-old man with a documented heart condition dies at home in Florida, the world calls it a natural ending. The medical examiner signs the certificate. The tributes pour in. The story closes. That is what should have happened when Hulk Hogan was found unresponsive inside his Clearwater mansion on the morning of July 24, 2025. It is not what happened, because the officers who arrived at that house noticed something wrong almost immediately, because the investigators who followed them found 5 separate details that refused to fit the official narrative, because the FBI was brought into a death that had already been classified as natural, and because one of those details, a concealed room hidden behind a basement wall, accessed in the final hours of Hogan's life, is still classified. This is the full story, and it is not finished yet. The morning everything ended, the call came in early. A 911 dispatcher received a frantic report of cardiac arrest from an address in Clearwater, Florida. Emergency responders arrived at the mansion and found Terry Gene Bollea, known to the entire world as Hulk Hogan, unresponsive. Paramedics worked to restart his heart. None of their attempts succeeded. At 11:17 that morning, physicians at Morton Plant Hospital pronounced him dead. He was 71 years old. The initial explanation moved quickly through every news outlet on Earth. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as acute myocardial infarction, a sudden, catastrophic heart attack, and classified the ruling as natural. To most people reading the headlines that day, the conclusion seemed entirely logical. Hogan's body had absorbed decades of professional punishment, more than 24 surgical procedures, a lifetime of physically extreme performance. He had been quietly managing both leukemia and atrial fibrillation, a condition where the heart loses its normal rhythm without warning. The math appeared straightforward, but the picture had a complication that the headlines did not fully capture. People who had spent time with Hogan in the months before his death described a man who appeared to be in a period of genuine recovery. His wife noted that he had committed to structured daily workouts, meditation, and careful nutrition. Friends said he looked better than he had in years. He had been photographed meeting fans outside his home, looking alert and upright. A man who appeared to be gaining ground does not typically collapse without some external disruption to what was already working. The police officers who first entered that house observed the scene with that contradiction already in mind, and what they observed prompted a decision that is not made lightly in any investigation. They requested federal involvement in a death that had already been classified as natural. That single decision is what this story is really about. The gym that nobody had used, the first unusual detail, was waiting in the room that mattered most to Hogan personally. Throughout his life and into his retirement, the gym was the one space he never neglected. Friends and family described it consistently as his sanctuary, a room filled with weights, training equipment, and memorabilia from his career. Even after his major spinal surgery in May 2025, as his recovery progressed, he had returned to light workouts at home. Those who knew him said physical training was not something he scheduled. It was simply part of who he was. When federal investigators entered that room on the day of his death, they found a space that looked as though nobody had been inside it in days. Surfaces were clean to an unusual degree. Weights were arranged in precise order. Floor mats showed no sign of recent contact, no compression marks, no moisture, no disruption. There were no water bottles, no towels. None of the small accumulated evidence that appears naturally when a person actually uses a training space, for a man whose daily routine included consistent physical activity. The condition of that room was not what investigators expected to find. The cleanliness was not the cleanliness of a room that had not been used. It was the cleanliness of a room that had been deliberately cleaned and organized before emergency services were called. That observation is not, on its own, evidence of anything criminal. There are reasonable explanations for a tidy gym, but combined with what investigators found next, it became part of a pattern that demanded explanation. Here is a question worth sitting with. If you knew that investigators would be examining your home after an emergency, what would you clean first, and why? Drop your answer in the comments. It says something interesting about how we think about privacy and protection. The security system that someone turned off Hogan had invested considerably in protecting his property. The system installed at the Clearwater mansion included multiple cameras covering the exterior and interior, motion sensors, and backup protections designed specifically to resist tampering. He was known to be careful about his privacy, a priority shaped by years of public life and the legal battles that had followed him. The system was built to create a reliable record of every entry, exit, and movement around the property. When forensic technicians reviewed that system after his death, they found no record. Not because of a technical failure, not because of a power interruption. The entire system had been manually disabled from inside the property. Someone had gone to the control panel and deactivated it deliberately, using the correct access codes to override every component. There was no forced entry anywhere in the building. Doors were undisturbed. Windows showed no evidence of tampering. The structure of what investigators found pointed in one of two directions. Either Hogan had disabled the system himself, or someone with intimate knowledge of its layout and codes had done it for him. The FBI deployed cybercrime and digital forensic specialists to reconstruct the timeline from whatever records remained. Modern security systems retain logs, timestamps of when cameras activate or deactivate, when alarm states change, when any component is altered. Smart home devices connected to the same network, including thermostats, lighting controls, and automated door systems, also generate movement data that can sometimes establish where people were in a house during a specific window of time. Despite that reconstruction effort, the digital record did not deliver a clear answer. The system had been disabled, but the records did not conclusively identify who had disabled it. No external breach was detected. The evidence pointed towards someone physically present at the control panel, which is a much narrower set of people than the number of people who might have wanted to disrupt the investigation. Two unusual details: a cleaned gym, a disabled security system. And then the investigators looked at Hogan's phone. The phone call 3 days before, 3 nights before his death. Late in the evening, Hulk Hogan received a phone call. He took it privately. The call did not last long. When it ended, the people in the house noticed something they had rarely, if ever, seen from him before. His wife described the expression on his face when he came back into the room as genuine fear. She told investigators she had been with him through some of the most difficult periods of his life: health crises, public scandals, painful surgeries, and she had never seen him look that way. He did not explain what had been said. He did not elaborate or share his reaction. He went quiet, and that silence from a man known for being expressive and vocal communicated something she said she could not ignore. Federal investigators treated that call as a priority. Digital forensic teams traced its origin and encountered a level of technical sophistication that immediately marked it as unusual. The call had been deliberately routed through multiple servers across several different countries. Redirecting each time, investigators followed the signal to its apparent source. Fully tracing it back to a genuine point of origin proved effectively impossible with available tools. Routing a phone call through international proxy servers requires both technical knowledge and deliberate intention. People who make routine calls do not do this. It is a method used by someone who understands digital investigation well enough to prevent it. Whoever placed that call was not trying to be found. The FBI considered several possible explanations. The call might have been a warning, someone alerting Hogan to a threat he had not known was approaching. It might have been connected to financial pressure or extortion over private matters that remained undisclosed. A third possibility involved sensitive information Hogan may have been holding, though no direct evidence supported that theory at that stage of the investigation. What the investigators did agree on was this: the call was planned, the call was hidden, and the call visibly changed the man who received it. 3 days later, he was dead. The contents of that conversation remain classified. What existed before the call and after it were two different versions of the same man. A family divided by history and money. Understanding the full context of Hogan's death required investigators to examine the state of his personal relationships, because the financial structure of what he left behind told its own complicated story. His first marriage, to Linda Claridge in 1983, had produced 2 children, his daughter Brooke and his son Nick. For years, the family maintained a visible public image, reinforced by a reality television series that presented Hogan as a devoted and involved father. That image began fracturing in 2007 when reports of infidelity surfaced. The marriage collapsed. Linda filed for divorce after 24 years together, and the separation was public and bitter, with accusations coming from both sides. Hogan later acknowledged that the years immediately following that divorce were the darkest of his life. He admitted to experiencing serious depression and thoughts of suicide during that period. Statements he made in recorded interviews, not rumors. He married a second time in 2010 to Jennifer McDaniel, a marriage that ended quietly in 2021. He married a third time in 2023 to Sky Daly, a yoga instructor whose presence in his life, his closest friends said, brought him a kind of stability he had not previously found. His relationship with his daughter Brooke had remained strained throughout those years. The public scandals surrounding his name, most significantly a leaked private video, had placed significant emotional distance between them. She had been absent from his third wedding. The contact between them had been minimal and formal for some time. When his will was disclosed after his death, the contents confirmed the depth of that estrangement in a concrete financial form. Brooke had been removed entirely from his estate. His son Nick was named sole heir to assets valued at approximately $5 million. Brooke received nothing. That kind of decision does not appear in a will by accident. It reflects something that happened, some accumulation of hurt or conflict or perceived betrayal, serious enough that Hogan made an explicit legal choice to exclude his own daughter from everything he had built. Investigators noted this detail not because it pointed directly toward any specific conclusion, but because inheritance disputes and long-running family tensions are routinely examined as context in the deaths of high-profile individuals. They would have been negligent not to. What do you make of that decision? Leaving one child everything and one child nothing is a statement. What do you think Hogan was trying to say? Share your thoughts below. The surgery and the question it left open. 6 weeks before his death, on May 14, 2025, Hulk Hogan underwent a major spinal procedure. The operation was a 4-level anterior cervical discectomy and fusion, a surgery that removes damaged discs from the cervical spine and fuses adjacent vertebrae to restore structural stability and relieve pressure on the nerves passing through that region of the spine. A 4-level fusion is not a minor intervention. It spans a significantly larger section of the cervical spine than the single-level or 2-level procedures that most patients undergoing this type of surgery receive. The recovery period is longer, the risks of complication are proportionally higher, and for a 71-year-old patient already carrying both leukemia and atrial fibrillation, those risks carried additional weight. Medical specialists consulting on Hogan's case noted a specific anatomical concern: the phrenic nerve, which runs from the cervical spine downward through the chest and controls the diaphragm's contractions, passes through the surgical field of a cervical fusion. When this nerve is compromised during or after such an operation, the consequences can be sudden and severe. The diaphragm loses its ability to contract properly. Breathing becomes inadequate. In a patient whose heart is already struggling to maintain consistent rhythm, as Hogan's was due to atrial fibrillation, an acute drop in oxygen can trigger cardiac arrest without any external warning. Some accounts that circulated after his death suggested that Hogan's phrenic nerve may have been affected during or after the May procedure. This was never officially confirmed. His wife pushed back strongly against rumors in the weeks following surgery, stating that his heart function was strong, that he was not in any critical state, and that he was recovering steadily. Photographs taken in the weeks after the operation appeared to support that account, but complications from multi-level cervical fusion can remain latent for weeks or months. They do not always appear during the immediate recovery window. When investigators reviewed the timeline leading up to his death, the surgical history represented a medical pathway that could not be dismissed: a vulnerable respiratory system, a heart already prone to rhythm disruption, and a nerve that may have been left compromised by a complex procedure performed 10 weeks before he died. Sky Daily has since announced plans to pursue a medical malpractice claim, a step that signals her belief that his death was not entirely the product of natural deterioration. No court has yet adjudicated that claim. The room behind the wall during a second forensic search of the mansion. Federal agents made a discovery that redirected the entire investigation. Hidden behind what appeared to be an ordinary section of the basement wall was a room that did not appear in any property record on file with the county. It was not referenced in any building permit, renovation application, or inspection document that investigators were able to locate. The entrance had been constructed with enough precision that only a deliberate physical search tapping walls. Measuring interior dimensions against exterior floor plans would reveal the discrepancy. There were no visible handles or hinges from the outside. It opened through a mechanism that required specific knowledge of its location and trigger. To reach it, you had to know it existed. Inside, agents found an organized archive. Files were stacked and labeled systematically, arranged in a way that reflected a sustained effort over time rather than material hastily gathered and stored. The contents covered personal communications, financial records, legal correspondence, and medical documents. Some files referenced business relationships and associated individuals that had not appeared anywhere in the earlier stages of the investigation. Most significantly, some documents carried dates as recent as the day before Hogan's death. That detail meant the room had been accessed within the final 24 hours of his life. Whatever he had placed there, reviewed there, or arranged there had mattered to him until nearly the very end. The FBI has been deliberate and selective about what it has disclosed regarding the contents of that room. Officials confirmed publicly only that the investigation was ongoing and that no conclusion about foul play had been reached. Requests for specific details about the files were declined without exception. Some unconfirmed accounts suggested that certain documents may have been connected to external pressure on Hogan, that the room may have functioned as a kind of private insurance archive, a collection of information that he kept secured precisely because of its sensitivity. Whether that material had made him a target, or whether he had assembled it as protection against a threat he had already identified, remains an open and unresolved question. For the people closest to him, the discovery presented a painful challenge. The version of Hogan, they understood a man who had spent his final years simplifying his life, focusing on his health, and finding some measure of peace, now had to be reconciled with a man who had secretly built and maintained a concealed room that none of them knew about, and who had apparently been using it until the day before he died. Those two versions of the same person have not yet been fully reconciled. The classified contents of those files are the only thing that could do it. The legacy and the open file Hulk Hogan built something that cannot be measured in title belts or television ratings. He transformed professional wrestling from a regional entertainment form into a global cultural phenomenon. His confrontations inside the ring during the 1980s and 1990s reached audiences who had never followed the sport and have never followed it since, but who recognized him instantly. His influence on the performers who came after him, the shape of the industry they inherited, the scale of the audiences they were able to reach, connects in a direct and traceable line back to what he created. The famous body slam of Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3 is one of the most recognizable single moments in the history of sports entertainment. It is replayed on highlight reels more than 30 years later because it captured something that very few athletes in any discipline ever managed to capture: the precise instant when an entire arena full of people stopped breathing at once. That is the record he left. It is not diminished by the complications that followed him through his private life or by the questions that have surrounded his death, but those questions remain genuinely open. The official cause of death, acute myocardial infarction, attributed to underlying leukemia and atrial fibrillation, represents a medically coherent explanation. His body had real vulnerabilities. Sudden cardiac arrest in a man his age, with his documented conditions, is not statistically unusual. For many people, that explanation is sufficient and probably accurate. For others, the 5 separate anomalies that investigators found at the scene: a deliberately cleaned training space, a manually disabled security system, a classified phone call routed through international servers that left a visibly frightened man in its wake, a will that cut out one of his 2 children entirely, and a hidden room full of organized private files accessed on the last day of his life add up to something that feels like more than coincidence. Whether those details connect to something deliberate, or whether they reflect the ordinary complexity of a private life that the public never had full access to, is a question that investigators have not yet answered publicly. The medical malpractice proceedings, if they move forward, will force additional medical evidence into the public record. The federal investigation, still open as of the time this script was completed, has not yet reached or released a final conclusion. Family members have been promised a full briefing before any official findings are disclosed. Until that happens, the space between what is known and what is fully established remains open. And in that space, the questions that investigators first noticed on the morning of July 24, 2025, continue to accumulate weight. Hulk Hogan spent his entire public career inhabiting a character larger than any arena could fully contain. The man behind that character was considerably more complicated, more wounded, more private, more careful about what he protected, and from whom the 5 details that do not fit a simple natural death may ultimately be explained. The surgery may have damaged a nerve that quietly compromised his breathing. The phone call may have been an unrelated personal matter that happened to disturb him at an already vulnerable moment. The security system may have been disabled by Hogan himself for reasons that seemed ordinary at the time. The concealed room may contain nothing more than the private records of a man who had learned, through decades of hard experience, that he could not trust everything to remain private. All of that is possible. None of it has been confirmed. What has been confirmed is that the investigation is not closed, that a hidden room accessed on the final day of his life still has classified contents, that a phone call placed through international proxy servers has never been traced to its source, and that the man who received it went from settled to visibly frightened in the space of a single conversation. Where do you stand on this? Do you think the official explanation covers everything? Or do those 5 details bother you the way they bother the people still investigating? Leave your honest thoughts in the comments. The people who read and respond here consistently push this conversation in directions that change how we approach the next story. And if someone in your life would want to know about this, share it with them. The best conversations we have always start with someone saying, "Did you hear about this?"